How much inner strength do you have? Do you even know? Remember, we can't know our real power until we're challenged. Only when there's resistance, when we have to dig deeper, do we discover those resources that can even surprise ourselves. That's the way it works. The Talmud puts it this way: you don't know the power of the olive until you press it. When you press it, that's when it produces olive oil. And the same is psychologically and emotionally for all of us. So it's a very fascinating discussion of how much are you capable of. So in regular times, we do as best as we can, sometimes more, sometimes less, sometimes we push ourselves. But when there's a real challenge, there's competition, we suddenly discover much far greater strengths than we can ever imagine. Now, this doesn't mean we always have to be desperate and we always have to have a challenge. But it just demonstrates that that's the only time you really can see what a person is capable of. I say this because each of us in life is going to face many different challenges. And we often resign ourselves and say, I can't handle that. Too much for me. We don't even take it on in the first place. But it's a big mistake because we're capable of far more than we can imagine. I remember a life-defining moment in my teenage years. You know, those years when you wonder about what's out there, the mysteries of existence. Is there such a thing as the infinite, as the eternal? So my parents had rented out for the summer in Brooklyn, near the Atlantic Ocean, a summer home. And I remember going there often in the evening. One night I decided to take a walk to the beach. And the Atlantic Ocean, the waves were storming away. And I was just mesmerized by the sea. Like we're all mesmerized. But especially by the waves. And in my childish mind, I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to wait around to see when these waves go to sleep. Everything goes to sleep. And I waited. I remember an hour, another hour. And every time it's quieted down, I thought maybe that's it. No. All night. I was up till dawn. And I had an epiphany, a discovery, just by watching those waves, that there are things in life that are unstoppable. There are things in life that perpetuate, are relentless. And it gave me that sense that all of us have a certain element of that in our lives. However, it has to be important to us. Obviously, if it's optional, no one's going to push themselves to that extent. So the sea became a reminder for me that in life, there are things that continue on, and literally in a perpetual way, never stopping. And it was an inspiration. Obviously, as human beings, we do need to go to sleep, and we need rest. But nevertheless, that should not in any way minimize and weaken or blunt the drive, that drive of the human spirit to reach heaven and beyond. And you see it throughout life. You see everyone who's achieved excellence, whether it's athletes or others in other industries. There was something that compelled them, that pushed them. It may have been to break a record. Take the 100-meter dash. So until 1968, no one had broken the 10-second barrier. Until Jim Hines did that. And it was considered, wow. And no one thought anyone would ever break his record until Usain Bolt in the 90s got it down to 9.58 seconds. And no one thinks that can ever be broken. What was it that pushed these individuals? Or when you hear stories about a mother trying to connect to a child that has autism, and there's some relentless belief and faith that the mother has that I can connect when all the doctors says you can't, that all the doctors say you can't. There's something extremely powerful about that. And I'm not talking about necessarily a total miracle. It's just that there's more than we have that we can ever imagine. But of course, the condition is that you have to really want it. A mother wants to connect to her child. An athlete wants to break the record, whether it's for fame or however you explain it. Like the guy that climbed the first time they climbed Mount Everest, they asked him, why'd you climb Mount Everest? So he says, because it was there. The thing is, in life, many of us are more complacent, especially when life is blessed. There's nothing pushing you. There's no reason to push ourselves to that extent. So the real challenge is not so much how much strength we have. The question is, do you have something that is really compelling, important? When it comes to an emergency, and no one should ever have an emergency, when it comes to a very urgent situation, then we push ourselves. And there's stories about literally superhuman strength that people have demonstrated in desperate situations, life and death. I've shared this story before about my own story when I was as well a teenager. I had ragweed, what they call hay fever, and the allergy. So the month of August and the second and the first half of September was always miserable. The more beautiful the day, the higher the pollen count, literally your whole plumbing system. Your nose ran, your throat itched, your eyes rubbed. It was just miserable. One summer, I was in Detroit, and there must have been some abundance of ragweed that season, and I had literally an asthmatic attack in summer camp. They had to give me something to clear the passages. When I got back to New York, I went to see a famous allergist. His name was Dr. Redner. Okay. And he gave me those scratch tests where they put on your arm here several different ingredients, I guess is the word, I don't know, several different items. It included ragweed and dust and a few others. And the dust and the ragweed both blew up, which was indicated that I was extremely sensitive to that. To the point that I had an attack right there in the doctor's office. So the doctor suddenly gave me an injection of something. Everything cleared up. I felt like in paradise. Suddenly, a regular summer day, which was always miserable, all my passages were clear. So I said, what was that an injection of? He said, adrenaline. So I said, the adrenaline that we generate when we are excited and looking forward for something? He said, yeah. So I said, so what do we need all the tests? Give me adrenaline. Every time I have an allergic reaction, I'll just take the adrenaline. He says, you can't do that. You'll start building up immunity. It's dangerous. So then something came to me. I asked the doctor, I said, is it possible that when I'm really immersed in something really important, that the adrenaline, just like you gave me that injection, that my natural adrenaline controls the symptoms and my allergies are weakened? And I told him Sundays, I was especially under pressure because my work was on Shabbos and Saturdays. I would memorize my Rebbe's talks, and it was a very intense time. And then Sunday was the most difficult day to recreate it and write it down. And I noticed that on Sundays I didn't really feel allergies. So I thought I was distracted. I was so busy I didn't even notice my nose running. So he said, no, absolutely. If you're doing something that's generating a natural adrenaline, the allergies can disappear even. And he said to me this. He said, do you ever notice opera singers, Broadway actors, pianists, they can go for 2-3 hours on stage and they never sneeze and never yawn. Sneezing and yawning is a physical reaction. He says because when they're in that type of zone, with so much pressure, they have a superhuman control. The adrenaline helps them control the usual reflexes that we would have. You set your mind, he said, that you want to wake up exactly 5 a.m. If you really set your mind, you don't need an alarm clock. You'll wake up exactly. And that gave me the idea that when a person is really passionate about something, they suddenly dig deeper. The adrenaline and probably other chemicals in our system begin to flow and in turn create something that we would usually not be able to access. A greater strength, greater power. Which also explains why you find, God forbid, if two people are sick in the hospital, and one person has guests and visitors and family and gifts, and the other person is just alone. Even if they're suffering from the same symptoms, you tell me, the person alone is going to deteriorate quicker in most cases. Well, why? The illness objectively is the same. Is because having friends, having support, does something for us. It gives us, it strengthens our immune systems. So we see here that so many challenges in life, it's not just the challenge, it's what you're doing about it and whether you have the ability to dig deeper. I was blessed growing up around people that had that sense of urgency, that felt they were on a mission. And that indeed gave them that type of unstoppable energy. The ability to persevere even in the most difficult times. Now, perseverance sometimes is associated, obviously, with someone who has a high threshold for pain, which means they will continue to push themselves even when most people are uncomfortable, won't. But it's much deeper than that. It's like the waves. When you believe in something, when you love something deeply, and it's not optional, it's not arbitrary, you then can push yourself and reach heights that you would never have imagined. So in life, it's important to have such priorities. Basically, what's the mission of your life? I don't want to talk about myself. I've already given enough examples of myself, but I have to say what drives me and where I see others that are driven is when you have that sense, you must continue. As a young child, I remember recognizing that. The idea that when you start something good, never stop. And that gave me the strength and the commitment that the classes I do, even when you're under the weather or there's a blizzard, or I remember even 9/11 was a Tuesday morning and I had a class in Manhattan Wednesday evening. Now there's no way to get from Brooklyn to Manhattan because all the bridges were closed after 9/11. But I knew that I have to give this class in Manhattan. So I finally figured out that there was a way. Going through the Midtown Tunnel was open. There was no traffic. It took me faster than ever before. I come to Manhattan to the designated location where my class was, Upper West Side. Hundreds of people were there. Usually, max, we had 80 people. Hundreds. There was a need to commune, especially in New York after what had happened. People were very vulnerable. Now, what pushed me to do it? I could have easily canceled, send everyone a message that we don't have a class tonight. It would be understood, 9/11, just a day earlier. Because I knew there's a certain importance. In a way, it was my mission, so I did it. Anything that you're doing that's good, never stop. There are many things we should be stopping, but the good things, stay with it. Now, the story of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was the greatest sage in the Talmud, but he didn't begin to study until he was 40 years old. Until he was 40, he was an ignorant person. But at 40, he was motivated. He had met a young woman. They ultimately would marry, and she pushed him. But what finally made the decision? He said to himself, I'm 40 years old. 40 years old, it may not be old, but it's also not young. And you already have habits and routines. I can't begin now. But he was ruminating on this, and he was standing somewhere in the woods where there was a brook of water running. As he's watching the water run, he sees a stone in the riverbed, that little brook, that had a perfectly bored, like drilled hole right through the stone. Like it was a perfect hole. Like someone had deliberately created that hole. He was wondering, how does that stone have such a hole? It looked so strange. Did someone come and drill it? Then he realized, he saw the water drops, that the water kept dropping through that hole. So over years, just one water drop, but consistent, persistent, bore a hole through the stone. And he said to himself, it's a lesson in life. Now, he wasn't a simple man, obviously. If an inanimate stone can be pierced in such a perfect way through a persistent drop of water, we're not talking about laser beam, we're not talking about tremendous water pressure, but it's persistent. It keeps on hitting the rock again and again. So how much more so can a human soul begin something new, and it should pierce me? And for that was one of the final motivators that taught him to persevere. And that's what he did. He went off to study at the encouragement of his wife, and ultimately became the greatest Talmudic teacher of all. We came back with 24,000 students. And when his wife came out to greet him, and the students were wondering who she is, he says, everything you have and everything I have is in her honor, because she had pushed him. This story, and so many other stories we hear, touches us in a very deep way, because you see that even though it wouldn't make sense initially, but it's the persistence, it's the commitment. So it's not about doing a lot, cramming it all. It's about doing little but consistently. That's the power of persistence. That's the power of perseverance. And when you do that, and you have that driving force, you can pierce holes in anything. You see it also. Most people don't travel down this road because it's the more difficult road. It's easier to be laid back, not push yourself, not force yourself. But this brings us back to what is compelling in our lives. And when it's compelling, yes, you suddenly have superhuman powers, more than you could ever imagine. And allows you to be unbreakable and unstoppable, unflappable. So, practical suggestion is to sit down and write down for yourself, what are the things you know with certainty that you really believe in, that you're ready to fight for. That exercise may also not be easy, because many of us don't necessarily have something we're ready to fight for. Yes, we'd fight for our lives, the lives of our loved ones, but try to broaden that and help identify a value, a standard, something that is critical to you. They like to talk about the last lecture. If this was the last day of your life, what is it that you would do? Meaning there's that sense of urgency because you're not going to have another chance. That's how a leader thinks. That's how you make true change. You don't say maybe someone else will do it. You know that it matters. They tell that parable, analogy of a town in the good old days. A poor town didn't have any special wealth. One day they get a message that the great king of the nation, of the empire, is coming to visit that town. So of course this was very special. It's a once in a lifetime. And the townspeople wanted to bring a gift to the king, but they didn't have much. They were poor. So they came up with an idea. We'll put a big barrel in the center of the town, and everyone from the town will pour a little wine from their reserve, so to speak, and we'll give the king the barrel. Not that the king needs it, but he'll understand the gesture, which is token for us, but for us it was hard to do because they were very poor. So one person in town says to his wife, why should I go pour wine? Everyone else is going to pour wine. I'll pour water and we can save the precious wine for ourselves. Problem was, everyone else in town was as smart as he was. So at the end of the day, the king got a barrel of water. When you feel that your contribution doesn't make a difference, you're not going to push yourself. You're not going to go bring wine. It's critical to know that you matter absolutely on a cosmic level, and therefore all your choices matter. And that's why it's critical to know that you believe in something, and then you fight for it. You never give up. There's no such thing as you don't take no for an answer. So can you come up with anything of that nature? And again, I understand most people will come up with a life-threatening situation where then they'll mobilize themselves and become very vigilant. But think of it, it's not a life-threatening situation. What would be something you're ready to fight for? In our day and age, where we have so many comforts, you can press a button and get a delivery in 20 minutes. The fast food, instant gratification generation, it's becoming increasingly difficult to have something of this nature that transcends time and space. But it's critical for the human spirit, because the human spirit is ultimately infinite and has endless resources. We just don't know it. Our bodies, our physical beings, have parameters. We have limits. You can't jump up 30 feet without any support. We have limits. We have to eat and drink and sleep and so on. But the human spirit is ultimately bottomless, or I'd say beyond bottomless. That does not have limits. And you see that when people push themselves or situations that come up. So in a world where on one hand we have so many comforts, those comforts in a way can also undermine that compelling sense of urgency. So may you and all those that you know and everyone be blessed to have that sense that I'm not living up to my calling. Even if a little, there's a lot more to do. And there is. We look at around the world, the confusion out there, the demoralization, the polarization, all the zations you wish, like isms, zations. So it's time to reverse that, and we begin with ourselves. We begin how we look at ourselves, context of our families, and realize you have something unique that you and only you can contribute. And that should cause you to be driven. That's not optional. To become unstoppable through the perseverance and commitment to that which you believe in, to your calling. Thank you so much. This has been Simon Jacobson, meaningfullife.com, where you can find this and many other offerings. Please subscribe to these offerings, subscribe to our YouTube channel. And I'd love to hear feedback. And above all, share. Please share this. You have those infinite waves, that eternal power. Use it. That will make all the difference. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Meaningful Life Center. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at meaningfullife.com/donate.